Manager. We're thinking of an acronym, I promise, for my title. I am new to the Water Collaborative, and this is my first lunch and learn with the Water Collaborative, and I'm very excited to discuss our key findings from this current or past regular session for 2024 of the state legislature. We're going to try to answer as many of your questions as we can. But before we do that, I do want to set just a few ground rules. So to start, feel free to be on or off camera as you please. You know, it's your decision, no pressure. Please keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. And regarding questions, we would ask that you please save all questions for the Q&A at the end of the presentation today. There are going to be quite a few people on, and we just want to make sure that everybody is respectful of the space and time to cover the topics of today. During the Q&A, if you do have a question, we ask that you raise your hand or type STACK, STACK, in the chat. And Taya, hey Taya, will be monitoring the chat for questions. She will also be our chat manager for today, so she'll try to respond as promptly as possible. So if you have a question and you're noticing that you're not necessarily getting called on, defer to the Q&A chat. If we aren't able to get to your question during the webinar, please feel free to email us after. All of our contact information, including our speakers' information, will be available. So today's speakers include Rebecca Melpass, our lovely Director of Policy and Research here at the Water Collaborative. Want to wave as I say hello to everyone or call everyone. Peter Wagner, former Public Policy Director for GNO Inc. Then me, hello. I'm not going to repeat my title, it's too long. And then Simone Mallows, am I saying that correctly? Yay! Campaign Director for Restore the Mississippi River Delta. And then Taya Fontenette, who is our Policy and Research Coordinator at the Water Collaborative. And then we also have our lovely Executive Director, Jessica Dandridge Smith, who we are going to give just a few minutes to give a brief introduction of what the Water Collaborative is, what we do, and the importance of today. Rebecca, I'm sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. Great job, Caitlin. First of all, I want to thank everybody for making a little time on a Friday. I know this is end of the week, TGIF, right? But I hope this is going to be a highlight of your day and you learn a lot. I see some folks on the call that I'm very familiar with and new names as well. Welcome. The Water Collaborative has been around really since as a grassroots movement since 2013, but formalized in 2017. And we focus on helping communities live and thrive with water. And what that means in my way of thinking about it is we try to actualize water as a human right. So we focus on nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, of course, but we also think about water accessibility, affordability, and quality in all of its intersections. Louisiana, as many of you know, is on the front lines, and we have to deal with all of these risks and other risks that are emerging, including saltwater intrusion, the insurance crisis, and hopefully no more other crises, although we are prepared for them all. I've been executive director for 5 years now, and I'm really proud of this team. I want to give a big shout out because they did the hard work here. I gave them some ideas and they took it and ran with it. So big shout out to Rebecca, our policy director, for leading on this process, and huge shout out to Taya and Caitlin for supporting and making this a reality. As Caitlin has already said, if you have questions about any of the things above, comments. Also, if you feel like we missed areas for next year, we want to know. I will say this one last thing is that this has always been something of a dream of mine. The Water Collaborative focuses on the intersection of water here in Louisiana, and oftentimes urban water quality goes forgotten. It goes missed. It doesn't get discussed as it should be, even though we know water is a human right. We know that it is our most important resource. We take it for granted here in Louisiana. And so I'm very, very excited for this legislative report to not only highlight all of the work, but also uplift the work that oftentimes goes unnoticed and forgotten, particularly around our water infrastructure systems. And also dismissing misinformation and disinformation. Everybody has the right to know all this information. Everybody deserves to know the truth, and everybody needs to know how to navigate our legislative sessions. It shouldn't just be for the lobbyists. It shouldn't just be for the policy wonks and nerds, and it shouldn't just be for the elected officials. It's for everyone. It is our right as residents of Louisiana. So I don't want to belabor the point. I think that's why you all are here. And again, I want to thank you all. We have many, many programs that are coming up. So if there's any of these other things that interest you, we have a lot more coming up this year. We have a busy 2024. And with that, I will pass it back to Ms. Caitlin. Thank you all. Oh, am I doing the introduction of the water? I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Because I'm so used to just saying it. I don't even
It's
need a slide
okay.
anymore. But if you want to go to the next slide, Caitlin. And just for those who are again not familiar with the Water Collaborative, we focus on three specific areas: education and advocacy, which we like to call wholesale education, really helping, like as what we're doing right now, helping residents navigate the policy world, navigate water infrastructure. And then on the other side of that, we really like to we focus on equity and really making sure residents have the say in how our systems work and be a part of that workforce. And obviously, a big one is policy. And so we do a ton of policy recommendations for large policies on the local level, ordinances, zoning, coding, you name it. We're thinking about it at the very minimum, and we hope to be a resource to those who are interested in seeing a brighter future for Louisiana. And yeah, I think that was what I forgot to say that I didn't say earlier. We have over 14 programs going right now, so I don't want to belabor that point because we have a really big agenda here. So I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Jessica. And with that, I will get right into it. So we are going to be tossing it off to our lovely policy director, Rebecca Malpass. However, again, Jessica did say, and I'm so sorry, y'all, I was having some type of issue with my Mac. But the Water Collaborative is an organization that envisions an inclusive network of communities who work to make sure our world is climate resilient, with New Orleans as a leader in rights-based water management. We do believe everyone has a role to play in stormwater management, water justice, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. Some of our pillars are education and advocacy, equity, and policy, and they intersect very often, hence why we're here today. So I will toss it to Rebecca Malpass to cover New Orleans Sewage and Water Board-based bills.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good afternoon, everyone. As she mentioned, my name is Rebecca Malpass. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for the Water Collaborative. Thank you, Jessica, for that lovely introduction as well, and Caitlin for holding the fort down and facilitating this call. And also thank you to our two guest speakers with us as well, Simone and Peter. I've actually asked Peter here today to join me. He's a wonderful and very knowledgeable partner of ours to help me discuss all of the hullabaloo around Sewage and Water Board this legislative session and more. But first, I really want to start with a brief background on Governor Jeff Landry's recent Sewage and Water Board Task Force. In February, the governor started out his term by putting together a 14-member task force to review pretty much everything about the Sewage and Water Board. It met a total of 3 times. Each meeting was open to the public, but only the second meeting allowed members of the public to actually make comments about the Sewage and Water Board. But all of the meetings culminated in a final report that is publicly available, in which task force members gave their recommendations to improve everything from billing to infrastructure to governance and financing. And this is really significant for a lot of reasons, because even though these are just recommendations that came out of this task force, it really lent itself to helping state legislators focus on proposals to fix some of these issues. And so 8 bills in total were written. 5 of them passed and 3 did not. In fact, the 3 that did not pass, interestingly, all related to changing the governance structure of Sewage and Water Board. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about these bills in the Q&A, but I really want to highlight the bills that did pass for the sake of time, because these are now laws that may actually impact us as folks who live in Louisiana, and particularly for the Sewage and Water Board ones, folks who live in New Orleans. Next slide, please, Caitlin. Thank you. So the first is Representative Matthew Willard's bill, now Act 703. This law is really straightforward. It prohibits the Sewage and Water Board from sending customers estimated bills starting at the beginning of next year. So that, that's great, right? Because many of us who live in New Orleans know estimated billing and inaccurate billing have plagued us for a really long time. However, the bill didn't suggest how we could get to 100% billing accuracy before smart meters are installed. And smart meters aren't set to be replaced entirely across the city until 2026. We know that things like meter reading, staffing shortages, literal obstructions to meter reading, such as like a car being parked over a meter, are causes of bill estimations in some respects. And there really weren't any efforts in this law to define how to overcome those hurdles, right? Or what happens if Sewerage and Water Board ends up sending estimated bills? Are there penalties for sending estimated bills? So as much in much legislation, there's something left to be desired in these bills in particular, and kinks that need to be worked out at some level. In relation to billing accuracy, Representative Stephanie Hilferty proposed what is Act 393, which requires a couple of things, one of them being fixed billing from the Sewerage and Water Board at a customer's request. It also requires the city of New Orleans to establish arbiters in each district, so there's 5 districts total in Orleans Parish, to make final decisions on billing disputes. Fixed billing would essentially ensure that customers can plan financially because they know what they'd be charged each month for water. And the law states that the amount that the fixed bill comes from the customer's last 12 actual non-estimated bills. So this is great for residents, as it's implemented. If folks have had disputed bills, want to be set up for fixed billing, you can actually know what you'd pay each month if you've been having issues. And for those who have had issues, right, there's a large number of billing disputes that have been accumulated by the Sewerage and Water Board, as many of us who live in New Orleans know, or maybe even outside of New Orleans, you may know this. Basically, this ensures that arbitrators are available to sort of shore this up, right? And this is a good thing. It essentially establishes a third party to make a final decision. Normally, arbitration is final, no appeals can be made, but they've written into this law in particular that any customer who doesn't agree with a final decision has the right to appeal to the city council. So again, there's another added layer of protection to New Orleans residents and to customers. And then along with that, I want to be brief about some of this stuff. Representative Hilferty also proposed Act 384, which allows the Sewerage and Water Board to hire outside of Orleans Parish after a 90-day period of trying to hire Orleans Parish residents, right? Previously, this was not possible because Sewerage and Water Board is bound by civil service requirements, so they have to hire folks who live in New Orleans. But opening up the employee pool could definitely help with things like employee qualifications and employee retention. And again, this is helpful, right? As I just mentioned, sometimes there are shorting staffages within the Sewerage and Water Board. But we also need to focus on more competitive employee benefits for civil service staff, as well as training and workforce development within Orleans Parish, right? Why is it so hard to find good and qualified employees? Why is it hard to keep those employees? And this is something that didn't necessarily need to be addressed in this particular law, but it is something that needs to be addressed in many different sectors in New Orleans and Louisiana as a whole. And then in addition, the final bill on this page in particular came from Senator Royce Duplessis. He established Act 527, which allows the Sewerage and Water Board to go onto private property to replace lead service lines. Lead service lines are a huge deal in the city of New Orleans. Many people know this. Lead service lines put us at risk of lead contamination. It's a public health crisis in many ways. There's money on the table to replace lead service lines. And so this bill sort of removes some of the barriers to doing this work, right? The Sewerage and Water Board in this law has said that they have to give at least 7 days written notice to the property owner. And this, like I said, definitely helps pull down some of those barriers. But again, there's a lot left to be desired, right? For one, the Sewerage and Water Board has continuously argued it cannot use public funds to replace private property. In this case, lead service lines that are on a homeowner's property. But the bipartisan infrastructure law from 2021, right, mandates that any federal funds used for lead service line replacement guarantee that the private side of a line is replaced, right? So there's the public side of the line, which comes from the water main to a property line, right? And then the private side is from the property line to the actual household. And so that's technically on private property and the responsibility of the property owner. But again, if anybody is going to use this federal funding, they have to replace both the public side and the private side of the line. And we know that Sewerage and Water Board is set to receive some of this federal funding. So provisions basically need to be made to guarantee that this work is done, right? And really, federal law supersedes any state laws that say that they can't use public money for private investments of this nature, right? They should be allowed to do that. The state law also says that really, if it's a public good or there's a public benefit to this, that it can be used, right? The Attorney General has said in some cases, waived over and said that they are allowed to use this funding. So we'd love to see that be put in place. And then second, once the work is done, there's no mention of who cleans up, right? So replacing lead service lines in our city generally means digging up concrete, digging up sod, turf, parts of a yard, possibly trees or decks or flower beds to be able to get to those lines, right? Who replaces it? Who pays for the repairs, right? Once the work is done. Right now it's unclear and nobody's responsibility, which likely, at this point makes it the property owner's responsibility unless amendments are made. So again, there's something left to be desired in this law. Amendments should be made to cover some of these really vital questions. Next slide, please, Caitlin. There were also a couple of bills related to drainage that I think are really important to highlight, even though two of them didn't pass. And I just want to give a brief background again on the drainage bills that came out of the last couple of years of the legislative session. Act 228, which came out in 2022 from Representative Jerome Zerang, allows political subdivisions, which is basically a municipality, amongst other things, so New Orleans, to establish a stormwater utility district and collect a stormwater fee. There was nothing in the law that said that we couldn't do this. It's basically just said, hey, you can do this. You can basically create a stormwater utility and you can collect a stormwater fee, which we don't have one in the city of New Orleans. A lot of places in Louisiana don't have one. So this sort of was beneficial to just say, this is legal to do. And then in 2023, Act 319 came out from Representative Rick Edmonds, who said, if you are going to establish a stormwater fee as a municipality, that needs to be voted on by the public. And so that was really, that was important, right? Because it allows for the public to make a decision, to have a say in the process of setting up stormwater fees, rather than just going through city council or these things sort of happening under the table, right? There's public engagement involved in this process. And then this year, a couple of bills that did not pass came out. One was from the House and one was from the Senate, that they both said the same thing, and then the Senate bill added a little bit to it. These were a little bit controversial, I have to say, in my opinion, having done this work, having looked at stormwater utilities, looking at stormwater fees. The Water Collaborative itself has a proposal for a stormwater utility and a stormwater fee for the city of New Orleans. And these bills, they related to St. Landry Parish in particular. So they weren't about Orleans Parish, but they did set a precedent, right? Basically, this bill would have allowed a stormwater utility to shut off a property owner's water supply if they didn't pay or they were late on payment for a stormwater fee, right? And what we know about stormwater and paying for that service, right, is the fact that it's the burden you place on the drainage system itself, right? From your property, the impervious surface area, which is all that concrete, all that, everything that comes into it. That's what goes into the drainage fee. The water that you use on your property, the water that comes out of your tap that you're using for cooking, for washing your hands, bathing, all that, has zero impact on drainage, right? It goes through the sewer system, but it has zero impact on drainage. So essentially, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. If this had been passed, you would have been penalized and still contributing to drainage, right? So it wasn't a very thought out bill. But again, if it had passed and it's something that comes up in future sessions, it's something that we definitely want to think about, right? As a whole, like how are we how are we thinking about this and enforcing stormwater fees? And then again, the Senate bill said the exact same thing, but in a good way, allowed stormwater utilities to secure indemnity bonds and liability insurance. And basically that it would secure the stormwater utility and say, hey, we have insurance basically in place. We have financing in place in case anything goes wrong, right? In a place like New Orleans and southeastern Louisiana, or just Louisiana as a whole, right? We deal with a lot of storms, a lot of potential damage. And so this was something that actually secured the entity, the drainage entity, which then meant that there hopefully would be fewer, if any at all, financial burdens for the resident because of this, were something, knock on wood, to happen, right? And the very last one that I want to talk about, and I know, Peter, I know you have some things to say on this too, and some others, so I'll be brief about this one. Act 763, it was actually passed and related to drainage. This was related in terms of sewage and water board again, basically authorizing all drainage infrastructure to be reconsolidated under sewage and water board. Back in the 90s, it was split up between the Department of Public Works and the Sewage and Water Board, which has, again, left a lot to be desired in terms of communication and coordination. And there's a lot of community confusion about who's responsible for what when it comes to drainage. So in general, this is a good thing. It puts us in a good position. How we actually get there, again, is I know the city is still trying to figure out some of those pieces with financing, moving employees over and all of that. But I will stop there. And Peter, if you want to talk about this bill or anything else that I mentioned, I would love for you to chime in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks for the invite. I'm at business school now, so I'm not at home. But I miss you all and really am thinking of you all every day from the business school lens and trying to, promote New Orleans's needs through the whole network that we have available to us here. And you hear them in the background, and I apologize for that right now. But I do want to underscore Act 763. This is a generational accomplishment, really. And as we speak, Sewage and Water Board and Department of Public Works are proceeding in good faith to ensure that this consolidation effort does occur. Last time I was able to check on it about a month ago, the expectation was that it might be done by the end of the year. Senator Harris did not put a time frame or a deadline within the bill, but they are really proceeding full speed ahead with this consolidation effort. As we all know, this will really eliminate duplicative work and confusion amongst residents long term. Department of Public Works in the city is also turning over all 311 records of complaints and where we might expect catch basins to be clogged. So a really good effort of transferring data and assets over for long-term consolidation. And I must commend the leadership of Sewage and Water Board and Public Works for their collaboration. It's really, unfortunately, it's kind of unprecedented, but both teams have really stepped up, and it is commendable. And it was wonderful to leave knowing that those conversations were proceeding and it was real. It was in legal last time I checked. So really great work there. Of course, we have 72,000 catch basins, so that's a huge quantity of assets to deal with on a regular basis. The goal is to have those all cleared. The long-term goal is to have every catch basin cleared every 5 years. That has not been happening. We've only been clearing a few thousand per year of late, except with this additional ARPA contract, which is going extremely well. And the city, if you are interested in catch basin cleaning, the city does have a great ARPA dashboard that is tracking the process for that particular contract before they turn it all over to Sewage and Water Board. Otherwise, I do want to shout out a few more bills that Rebecca mentioned that are extremely important. And I do want to dive deeper into this bill. Also, in the Water Collaborative's great PDF document that summarizes it, they shout this out. But Senator Harris's bill does try to encourage or sustain collaboration. So not only is this a one-time transfer, this bill also mandates that Sewage and Water Board, Public Works, CPRA, DOTD, as well as St. Bernard and Jefferson Parish meet on a quarterly basis. And they also must produce a regional plan to address urban flood prevention. So this bill really sets the stage for continued collaboration and a more of a regional approach, which of course at GNO Inc. we greatly appreciate, looking beyond the parish itself. Finally, this bill also offers the opportunity for Sewage and Water Board and CPRA and the city to sign a CEA potentially for Gentility Resilience District implementation as well. So again, this bill was really well thought out. It really opened the door for lots of long-term collaboration, and I'm thankful to be able to say that all that collaboration is occurring on good faith, and this bill was an incredible motivator of that. So again, shout out to everyone who's on the ground and involved in those conversations. Yeah, and other items just to touch upon, we appreciate the that now regional workers can apply for sewage and water board jobs once they're unfilled. So it still prioritizes the Orleans Parish residents, but it also allows talent from Jefferson or St. Charles or St. James or St. John to enter the workforce in New Orleans and really have an impact on the region and drainage issues in the region. And also want to touch upon billing for a second. There has actually been tremendous progress in answering some of Rebecca's lingering problems. As Rebecca mentioned, the bills by Hilferty and Willard about billing did not explain everything. However, the council has followed up. There is a bill that has been deferred until the council's September 5th meeting. It is calendar number 34755, so stay tuned to that. But this explains the process for averaging bills if you choose to have the average bills, and it also does talk about the process for Sewage and Water Board to begin their actual readings by 2025. It does explain that if Sewage and Water Board fails to provide a reading 3 months in a row, they no longer have the right to collect payment on that. So it does answer lots of Rebecca's questions that she mentioned. So again, stay tuned to this bill and stay tuned to the September 5th council meeting to see how they take action on this bill. It was also discussed at a hearing on August 15th, if you want to review what was discussed there.
Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate that added context and insight into how things might be moving forward. I'm going to pass it back over to Caitlin to talk about insurance and other things. There was a lot there, I know.
Thank you, Rebecca and Peter. So I am going to be talking about insurance and appropriations. So recently we changed insurance laws that could lower premiums and improve home resilience, but also introduce financial uncertainty and potential risks for untested insurance products. These shifts highlight the need for vigilant oversight and informed decision-making by residents. And so I chose to focus on bills that passed because if I didn't, the entire Lunch and Learn would be about insurance. Because there were quite a few bills, and I'll start with the House bills that I thought were the most pertinent to discuss today. One was HB 120, introduced by Rep. Matt Willard, which repeals the termination date for the Louisiana Fortified Homes program. And we are going to consider this a win because essentially this allows the program to continue so that it can provide financial assistance to homeowners impacted by wind damage incurred during hurricanes. The program grants upwards of about $10,000 to homeowners in order to strengthen their roofs. And this is a win, okay? Now, HB 701, introduced by Rep. Carver, is a very controversial bill, in my opinion. And I'm going to try to do this as succinctly as possible. And please feel free to email me directly to learn more about this. We have now created an insurance regulatory sandbox in Louisiana. This basically waives insurance companies' regulatory obligations and gives room for product testing in the state. So this is how I'm gonna explain this. Imagine the sandbox is literally a playground and the insurers are the kids in the playground. Well, they may have like a bucket to build a sandcastle. Some may have a beach ball. Some may have like a little volleyball net. And all those little tools are the products that they're going to be testing in Louisiana. Some of those may work in favor of us. So we may see the introduction of for instance, parametric insurance or peer-to-peer insurance, and other proven insurance products that work in the favor more often than not of residents. Unfortunately, considering the circumstances of our current insurance commissioner proven to be more so on the landry side of things, I'll put it that way, this could be a toss-up. And this bill is going to really unfold over the course of time based on how our insurance commissioner and how the insurance market in Louisiana is regulated. Who are going to be the players, the kids in the sandbox? What type of products, toys in the sandbox are we going to see? It really just depends. Now, this bill was supposed to be designed to open up the door for insurers to come back to Louisiana, and it will bring them back. But whether they come back and be more or less predatory is really going to depend on how this is regulated. So this is something that I think we should really be paying attention to, especially because it basically gives a temporary wave of regulatory obligations for the products to be tested in the state. So they can introduce whatever they would like without any real consequence, whether it works for or against resident best interest. So this is a bill that I would absolutely pay attention to. Another bill that I wanted to highlight was HB 611. This was introduced by Michael Gade Ferment, and it repealed the 3-year rule in homeowners insurance, which basically allows insurers to make changes more often, and this could impact how stable and affordable coverage is for homeowners. The 3-year rule was implemented for policyholders in high-risk disaster areas. And it was designed to make it less easy for insurers to eliminate policies after a 3-year period. That is now gone. And so this is honestly, I don't consider this a win. If anything, it's going to be really challenging because this is going to open the door for homeowners to not be insured after that 3-year period. We do go into more detail about this in our legislative report, and for the sake of time, I will just end in saying that this was a very good protective measure for homeowners, and now it's gone. And so I will leave you with that to think about, and please feel free to drop questions in the chat if you have them. But you can read more extensively about what we found in the legislative report post hosting today. So the next bill I wanted to highlight was SB 113. This gives the Louisiana Insurance Guarantee Association and Louisiana Citizens Property Insurance Company, which is the insurer of last resort for the state, some protection from being held responsible for certain property insurance claims. It also changes how much these organizations can charge for insurance policies. It essentially limits the amount of money that these entities can be held liable for property damages and penalties. Okay. It removes bad faith penalties, which were protective measures to prevent insurers from committing bad faith acts against policyholders. It also lowers the required rate increase from 10% to 5%, making insurance slightly more affordable, except in certain high-risk areas. However, this is giving a little bit more room for these two entities specifically to commit bad faith acts in a sense. Again, I, for the sake of time, don't want to belabor the point. If you have questions, please leave them in the chat, and you can find more about this in our report. SB 295 by Rep. Heather Cloud. It basically streamlines how insurance companies file and get approval for rates. Okay. This makes them send their rates in and their info to the insurance commissioner for certain types of property, casualty, and liability insurance. It potentially reduces how thoroughly rates are reviewed, which could affect how fair and accurate the rates are. Now, This does accelerate the approval process because it reduces the time frame in which the regulatory oversight happens from 45 days to 30 days. So essentially, this is making it easier for them to change or increase rates with less regulatory oversight and easier approval from the insurance commissioner, which is a win for insurers, obviously, but not necessarily for residents. The last one I wanted to highlight is SB 323. And it basically it aims to speed up the claims processing and process, essentially, removing penalties for insurers by adding fines for non-compliance. The law also sets good faith duties and deadlines for paying claims after disasters. This one's really important. And these all go hand in hand, right? So before I talk about how they go hand in hand, let me focus on this one. This basically reverses, in a weird way, for lack of better words, the bad faith penalties that insurers have and places some of that responsibility now on policyholders. Now they're saying basically, well, we're going to redefine what bad faith is for insurance. And a lot of what they have redefined is the protective measures that were put in place in the first place for bad faith acts to be avoided by these insurance companies. And now they are also saying, and you as the insured now have a good faith responsibility to do this, to do that, to do this. Okay. So again, these kind of go hand in hand because now we have SB 295 Act 10, which is making it easier for insurers to increase their rates. We have the prior bill that eliminates the 3-year rule. So now they can eliminate policies after the 3-year period if they so choose. And oh, by the way, we also are changing the definition of what a bad faith act is on an insurer, and now you have a good faith responsibility. So these are very important, especially when we consider that you have to have insurance to cover your home. And then I look at Act 257, and that forces people to go into Louisiana citizens' property as a last resort when they can't afford these homes, or for instance, they can't, their policies have been eliminated because of the 3-year rule, and then they have to lean on citizens. And now citizens has more wiggle room of how they handle claims. So these are very important bills that we focus on. Now with appropriations, I'm going to be very transparent. There are a lot of appropriations that were very pertinent in this past session. And I really encourage you, if you have questions about it, look at the legislative report first and see if your question is answered in the report, because there is a huge table with appropriations from both HB 1 and HB 2. But these in particular, I thought were very pertinent for today's purposes, and I'm going to focus on those. And if you have questions, please remember, again, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. The Coastal Restoration and Protection Authority, CPRA, they got last year for their implementation program, which is basically their expenditure to actually implement programming, right? Their expense 181,716,065. Then for 2024. This year, they got $202,698,204. Overall, for projects statewide, in order to actually construct projects, plan them out, there was a collection of about $838 million, close to that amount. Now, GOSEP, which is the governor's new Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, has received $100 million for the water sector fund specifically. The water sector fund was previously listed under another agency, and those funds were moved into underneath the GOSEP office. Okay. Department of Energy and Natural Resources has about $189 million expensed. And the Louisiana Department of Environment and Quality's Clean Water State Revolving Fund has about $3.5 million. And I want to talk about this because those state revolving funds, while that seems like a large amount, right? We aren't seeing that money be tapped into as it otherwise could be. And I will leave it up to you to discern why that may or may not be. However, those are funds that could really go towards projects for green infrastructure, for nature-based solutions, for things involving clean water promotion across the state. And state revolving funds are a helpful metric that we could be utilizing to accomplish those goals. And they are being underutilized. They're kind of just sitting there right now. But they are expensed for this amount. And then with that, I will open the floor before I move on to Taya, for Peter or Simone or another person to give any feedback or thoughts about this.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I will talk about insurance a little bit. Thankfully, that was a focus area at GNO Inc., and we can offer actually a slightly different perspective on some of these bills that may be helpful to better understand where legislators were coming from. Of course, legislators have heard from constituents around Louisiana that insurance is the #1 priority. That's how people have voted when they were polled, that insurance was their #1 priority. It was my intention to focus on infrastructure and water while at GNO Inc., and I ended up focusing on insurance mostly. So really happy to give some context to some of these bills. So just what you see on screen right now, SB 113 does something really good that will help everyone in the immediate term. So right now, if you are on Citizens by law has to charge you 10% above the whatever premium you would get from a private company. This act eliminates that 10% provision until 2028. So it does provide everyone across the state some short-term relief on those costs. The legislature understands that more people than they would like are on Citizens right now, and they want to give you some immediate relief. This was really a conversation led by the GNO delegation. Senator Talbot deserves a lot of credit for really standing behind this bill. It almost was till the end of the session before he was able to get traction with this. But really, everyone on Citizens should have a little bit of relief because of this bill. Also want to talk about SB 323. So this bill is not necessarily to make it more difficult on the policyholder. Really, the intention is to eliminate unnecessary litigation. So you see billboards all over the city, all over the country, of lawyers who want to help you with your insurance claims. Really, what they wanted to do in Louisiana was take advantage of the ambiguity within the Fair Claims Processing Law as it previously stood. And so previously, there was no definition of what constituted fair claims and what really began the time frame for when insurance companies could start counting the clock and put the insurance companies on the clock right now. But with this bill, now there's a written proof of loss, so you can no longer in court dispute when you started your claim. So that makes that reduces the incentive for lawyers to battle that out in court, and lawyers would postulate that insurance companies were violating good faith law because it was so ambiguous. So that's why they were so eager to take the claim. It also does reduce the maximum penalty from 200% to 50% extra, to also reduce the incentive for those types of unnecessary litigation. Two more things on insurance. Just want to underscore the fortified program. So Rep. Willard has eliminated the phase out of the fortified program. Huge. We are seeing that over 90% of those grants are going to homeowners in the GNO region. So people in New Orleans are really listening to this program and really benefiting from it, and we appreciate that dearly. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to gnoinc.org/insure, gnoinc.org/insure. This is a little webpage that we set up so that you can understand what discounts may be available to you now, including the fortified program and some other options. But shouting out that $20 million additionally was appropriated to the fortified program. So we should see future rounds of grants in the near future. We also next session is a fiscal session, and Commissioner Temple intends to use some of the fees that are paid by insurance companies on an annual basis to create a recurring revenue source for the fortified program. So it will no longer be at will by the legislature based on their priorities that year. There will be a ongoing recurring source for the fortified program to have revenue to administer more grants. And lastly, for insurance, I do want to talk about the 3-year rule for a second. So the 3-year rule in some ways was an incredible protection for Louisiana policyholders who already had a policy. It is why State Farm writes so much in Louisiana. It's because they had to. Because if you had State Farm coverage for 3 years, the only way that they could drop you is by leaving the state in entirety. The 3-year rule in Louisiana is the only law. There is no comparable law in the world. It is we are the only state, only place in the world with this type of law. So international reinsurance companies looked at us as an outlier. We have Michael Hecht, my former boss, had the opportunity to go with Commissioner Temple to London and hear this directly from reinsurance companies that's what they want to change in Louisiana. And the legislature took that up. And reinsurance is really the secret cost driver behind insurance prices. The reinsurance market in 2023 alone went up about 33%. So that really influenced what we saw in Louisiana. And there's some insurance companies in Louisiana that pay 90% of their premiums collected to reinsurance companies. So really, this change of law is eliminating an idiosyncrasy in Louisiana law and responding to international asks. So in many ways, it's a good thing, and it does express that Louisiana is more open to business, and hopefully we have more interest from companies now. So thanks.
Thank you for that, Peter. I appreciate that additional perspective. Simone, I know you're set to speak when after Taya talks about some of the coastal and water and energy issues. But if there's anything that you want to mention about the CPRA budgeting and appropriations aspect, please feel free, and then we can pass it over to Taya.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. Thank you for calling that out. So usually we do focus a lot on what the vehicle is for spending in the coastal program, and that's the annual plan. But what Caitlin mentioned was the funds that were kind of the day-to-day use of that too, right? And so this year the state did pass its highest annual plan to date at $1.7 billion. And that is that snapshot for that 1 year and then up to 3 years of how they intend to spend that money in the coastal program. There's a multitude of different funding sources. In the past years, folks have done a good job of putting jobs numbers to that. Additionally, there is an entire like kind of missing piece to that, which is how much the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their New Orleans district is investing here in coastal Louisiana. Most of that, some of that was regular, but a lot of that is from federal funds through IIJA or BIL. And in a past life, Peter and I worked together to also try to quantify those jobs that are available. So the state itself put forth a $1.7 billion annual plan, but the Corps had a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of work as well that's coming online in the upcoming years. And so to be able to attach the potential jobs to that seems like another way that we could talk about how that money's being invested. But specifically to Caitlin's point about budgeting and like specific numbers, the state of Louisiana did realize, that it had extra money in coastal Louisiana. They had a budget surplus, if you will, and there's only a certain amount of ways that you can spend that money. Coastal has always been a part of that portfolio So it's not, besides just it being a one-time use, it's not really explicit that you have to spend it on coastal or you have to spend it on roads, etc. But the coastal program has had a long tradition of having surplus dollars allocated to the coastal program. This year, that allocation was only $10 million. And I say only $10 million because in past years, we have realized $100 million of more in surplus dollars. And so that goes a long way in investing in the state's coastal program. So I just wanted to highlight that it was only $10 million this year in state surplus. And I'll sit back and I'll listen to Taya and then chime in after on a few more of the bills. But thank you, Caitlin, for opening the door to let me talk about money a little bit.
Thank you so much, Simone. I appreciate your perspective, and Peter, yours as well. Taya Fontenette will now go into state governance and water management. Taya.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So in this legislative session, numerous bills were introduced that impact our water infrastructure and ecological systems, as well as the agencies that govern them. So among them, a standout is Act 144 that was introduced by Representative Glenn Womack. The Community Sewerage System Infrastructure Sustainability Act provides a comprehensive framework for improving the standards of Louisiana's sewerage systems. The act mandates regular checks on compliance and fiscal status, requiring systems to meet both state and federal standards before being able to do things such as incur debt or adjust rates on ratepayers. Also, the act restricts the use of funds solely to system improvements, prioritizing the much-needed development of our infrastructure. On the other hand, the following acts introduced by Representative Brett Gayman represent a major shift in the management of key agencies by providing a little more authority to the governor's appointees. So starting off for Act 726, this act restructures the board of the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, CPRA, by removing 6 key members, including the Commissioner of Insurance and the Governor's Office of Homeland and Security and Emergency Preparedness. Instead, the act adds 3 members to be appointed by the governor. This reorganization raises concerns about the reduced diversity in the decision-making and the lack of critical expertise from state agencies, which could have unfavorable effect on coastal restoration efforts. Act 727 reorganizes the Department of Energy and Natural Resources, which was recently expanded to include a focus on energy, as well as the name change. So 3 new offices were created, including the Office of Enforcement, the Office of Energy, and the Office of Land and Water. The secretary of the department, who is appointed by the governor, has also been given new authority to propose organizational changes and streamline decision-making processes, powers that were previously more distributed throughout the agency. Next slide, please. So the direction of the legislature and the new administration is also reflected in the bills that failed to pass this session. So House Bill 568, introduced by Representative Mark Wright, aimed to enhance transparency and public engagement in government operations. By requiring state agencies to maintain accessible websites for public comments, the bill would have ensured that community feedback became visible and an integral part of the decision-making process. But this missed opportunity underscores the lack of focus or urgency on improving public involvement and transparency. As well as Senate Concurrent Resolution 64, introduced by Senator Michael Fessy, which requested for the Department of Energy and Natural Resources to act in accordance to the Supreme Court's 2023 ruling in the Sackett versus EPA case. This ruling significantly narrows the scope of the Clean Water Act by limiting the protection to only those wetlands that have a continuous surface connection to other waters of the United States, such as streams, oceans, rivers, and lakes. So as a result, many wetlands in Louisiana, which were previously safeguarded under these broader federal definitions, are now vulnerable. So the ruling shifts the responsibility to individual states to either uphold or strengthen protections for these disconnected wetlands that have already been protected under the ruling for the past 50 years. And on the chart, you can see which states will be most affected by the updated ruling, and that, with as much of we're doing with coastal land loss and protection, that the disconnected wetlands of Louisiana are in great danger if it is not solidified by the state. Next slide, please. So moving on to energy and water. Act 408 was introduced by Representative Joseph Orgeron and is a proposed amendment to the state constitution. The act aims to ensure that federal revenues generated from energy production on the outer continental shelf, which are the federal waters of the Gulf that extend past the state's boundaries, are deposited into the Coastal Protection and Restoration Fund. This expands the scope solely from traditional oil and gas revenues to include renewable resources such as wind, solar, wave energy. This is important as Louisiana's energy production is rapidly expanding to include clean energy. For example, in 2023, Louisiana signed an agreement to build the state's first offshore wind farms, which underscores the need to responsibly allocate this increase in anticipated funds. So the act was passed in tandem with Act 648 or 684 that mandates that the revenue be used for coastal wetland restoration, hurricane protection, and infrastructure impacted by coastal wetland loss. And so together, these acts that will have to be voted on, the amendment, which will enact for the act to be enacted, ensure that Louisiana's energy landscape, as it evolves, so does its commitment to protecting the state's resources. And so moving on to another source of emission capturing that we have is carbon capture and storage. So this is designed to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by storing it underground in geologic formations. While this technology offers significant potential for mitigating climate change, it also carries risks such as potential leaks, groundwater contamination, and seismic activity. So in 2023, Louisiana gained primacy authority over carbon capture activities, allowing the state to directly oversee and quickly expand opportunities for carbon capture. So currently there are more than 20 proposed projects being considered and many more that are being applied for across 15 parishes throughout the state. And so Act 702, introduced by Representative Shane Mack, is one of the most important that comes with carbon capture, as it established requirements for these activities regarding emergency preparedness, siting restrictions, groundwater monitoring, and reporting. And so while these measures are really crucial for ensuring safety and environmental protection, the effectiveness of the act will largely be depending on the state's ability to manage the balance between rapid project expansion and thorough oversight. And so of the 7 bills related to carbon capture, 4 were passed and 1 was vetoed by the governor. Next slide. So House Bill 934 was the one that was vetoed, introduced by Representative Jeremy Lacombe, was a blocked measure that would have directed financial support to local parishes and the Wildlife and Fisheries Conservation Fund from carbon capture revenues. So the veto not only reduces the financial incentives for local communities to support carbon capture projects, but also limits the resources available for conservation initiatives within the state. And lastly, House Bill 389 was introduced by Representative Shane Mack, proposed a 10-year moratorium on carbon transport and storage activities in Lake Maurepas and its surrounding wildlife management area. So although the bill was designed to protect against the potential risks associated with carbon transport and storage, as discussed before, it ultimately failed to pass. And so this outcome highlights the ongoing tension between the expansion of carbon capture and the need to prioritize environmental health. So overall, as Louisiana advances to expand its energy production and emission capture capacity, it is essential to ensure that these developments do not come at the expense of local communities and our natural resources. And I'll pass it to Simone to discuss any points she feels are important.
Yeah, thank you, Taya. Yeah, just same as Peter, to underscore a few items that you mentioned here, and also to bring up two other related issues as well. Definitely want to speak to Representative Ogeron's constitutional amendment on alternative energy. That will be the only amendment on the November ballot. And really, this took 3 different legislative sessions to try to get this out of committee, made to an act, so that it could be on the ballot for the voters. Of course, Louisiana already, their coastal program already receives from funds from offshore revenue sharing for traditional oil and gas activities. That happened. That actually passed right after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2007. So as similar effort was made on the state end to dedicate those funds to coastal restoration and protection through the Coastal Trust Fund. To date, that's still one of the highest approved constitutional amendments. I think it was over 80% to dedicate any future federal revenues to the state. Lots of people say that that helped to push the federal revenue sharing over the line, so that folks knew in Louisiana, when those revenues were shared, that it would enjoy an additional protection on the state level. Of course, revenue sharing on the federal level does have allowable uses, and they are limited, and so this goes to further protect that money and dedicate it to the Coastal Trust Fund, which is what Representative Joe Ogeron's amendment says. So you will see that on the November 5th ballot. I know folks have had a lot of time to put together some educational materials on that, because it did take 3 different efforts to get that passed out of session. But since then, we've had there was a lease sale last year in federal waters. And so there's lots of resources and educational materials if folks are interested in learning more about the constitutional amendment that'll be on that ballot in November. Do you want to talk about those CPRA board changes? 6 state agencies were removed from the CPRA board, including, as mentioned, DOTD, GOSEP, agriculture. Agriculture actually has some conservation programs that they lead, and LED. In place of that, 3 at-large appointments were added to the board. And they were in the process of all this discussion. There were amendments that we know of that would also try to perhaps consolidate the functions of CPRA and LDENR, and different things. But the biggest outcome was changes to the CPRA board. Really, that it follows a February executive order from the Landry administration, Executive Order 13, which directed these agencies to look at consolidation, to look at reducing the size and the number of boards, and to think about that consolidation of CPRA and LDENR. Taya also talked about some of those changes to LDENR. So most of that came as a result of that Executive Order 13. That's also known as the DRIVE Initiative. And a report was due at the beginning of August to the governor's office on the progress of that DRIVE Initiative. And so we eagerly await an update on the status of the DRIVE Initiative beyond just the legislative measures that was addressed in the regular session. We talked about surplus, we talked about the annual plan. One thing I do want to mention too, which seems that maybe coastal doesn't connect to this, but when Louisiana talks about a constitutional convention, and we just talked about Representative Ogeron's constitutional amendment, Louisiana's coastal program does have several protective measures in place through the Louisiana's constitution. And so whenever people bring up changes to the constitution, or as it was discuss a con or a special session just to address some fiscal matters, we always kind of sit up and take notice as coastal advocates, because we do know that Louisiana's coastal program in that coastal trust fund has several protective measures in the Louisiana Constitution. That has a ripple effect to even federal funds that come to the coastal program, and how those funds are expended, and who's in charge of expending those funds. So a beat off seemingly when we talk about things like a constitutional convention or con, but no, as coastal advocates, we are focused in on any changes to those coastal dedications, and what that ripple effect might be if that were to happen. So I think that's all I wanted to follow up on. Same as Pete, I'm happy to answer any questions if they come up.
Thank you so much, Simone. And I just wanted to briefly, before we move into questions, say that we actually decided not to talk about the Constitutional Convention, even though it was a very important experience for most of us in this policy space, simply because we will be talking about it all day. But I appreciate you nonetheless for bringing that up, because yes, that is something very important to pay attention to, because this was the first time it happened in this time period, but who knows, they may try to do this again. So it is very important for us to pay attention to that. So what I will do is I will stop sharing screen, and I will open the floor for questions. Taya, I think, has been monitoring the chat. And Taya, if you would like to maybe let us know if there are any questions that have been sitting there for a while, and read it off for me.
At this time, I do not believe there are questions unless it was in a separate chat.
Awesome. Is there anybody with a question? If you have a question, please just use the hand raise feature, and then I will call on you as I see the hands raised. And our speakers, our lovely speakers, are able to respond as well. Everybody knows everything, apparently, so this is great. No,
We did a good job. No questions. We thoroughly explained it. High five, team.
Or they're dumbfounded or overwhelmed by what we discussed.
a little bit of both. Kennedy Moore, hello. Hey, Kennedy.
Hi. I took some time to look at the report the other day, and I was very happy to see some things that were pushed forward. Disappointed to see some bills that weren't pushed forward. But as somebody who, of course, has been working with residents and dealing with lead for the whole summer, I just wanted to get you guys' opinion on what you think the moving forward next parts will look like for people who are concerned about lead. I know a lot of people are just concerned potentially that if they had lead within their own private lines, like what happens with that? I know that sewage and water board's responsibility to replace the lead lines that are within a property is a little bit iffy right now. So I just wanted to know what you guys thought.
Thank you for that, Kennedy. Yeah, I'll start out, and whoever wants to add in, please feel free to jump in. It's a really great question because we don't really know. What we do know is that Sewage and Water Board will receive funding through state revolving funds for this work, right? And they must replace the private side of the line. There's no question about it if they're going to use that money. How quickly that happens, right? How quickly we can remove those barriers that they say that they have, or get to some sort of understanding amongst Sewage and Water Board and the state and the agencies that this needs to happen. We need to just figure that piece out, right? Because it's a must that the private side of the line is replaced, right? And even without that, it doesn't make sense to replace the public side of the line without replacing the private side of the line, right? That's just being able to streamline that process, make it easier for the Sewage and Water Board, make it easier for residents, ensure that we reduce risk of contamination, because when you start messing with all those pipes, it leads to increased risks for lead exposure coming out of tap water. So it's really important to get all these measures in place. And I know Jessica quickly raised her hand, so I know she wants to add to this as well. So I'm going to stop there and let her add.
Actually, no, I didn't. I had another question.
Oh,
But so please continue.
you're coming with questions. Okay. Well, is there anything you'd like to add? Because I know you know all about lead service lines too.
No, you covered it really well. I mean, I think that from what I understand, that they do need to replace both sides of the line. And the gifts clause does not protect them from doing that. So I don't really think it's their choice, it's their mandate. That's how I feel about that.
And the only question that I have about that I maybe has been answered, but I've asked and I would like an answer to, is whether um, Sewage and Water Board has the ability to do this based on Louisiana Constitution Article 7, Section 14, which does prohibit the use of public funds for the purposes of gifts or for private residents. So I think we just need clarification. For example, we voted, I think in 2023, to allow Sewage and Water Board to be able to not charge you if for a leak on your side of the property. Basically, so that was in violation of the Constitution until we put in that amendment in the Constitution. So I'd still like legal interpretation to ensure that it is legal for Sewage and Water Board to use public funds for that purpose. And I will drop that section of the Constitution in the chat. So if anyone wants to take a look and make a consideration, but just want a legal opinion on that eventually before Sewage and Water Board does that.
Thank you, Peter. And that is the one that we're talking about with that gifts clause, right? It is Article 7, Section 14 of the Constitution. And as far as we know, I mean, we have talked to numerous lawyers on our side who know all about this work. There's nothing impeding them from doing this, right? Particularly because there is precedent set by the Attorney General in Louisiana saying there are certain circumstances when public funds can be used, right? So again, there's just a lot of back and forth right now, and we don't need to get into the minutia about what's happening there, I don't think, but we feel very clear on the position that it's doable and they can start this process. The only other thing that I would add is Sewage and Water Board currently says it's going to take them 10 to 12 years to replace all lead service lines. So we're looking at a decade of folks still having lead service lines. I know it's costly. I know there's a lot to consider in terms of like prioritizing who's getting their lines replaced, what we're going to do. And what I want to emphasize is the Water Collaborative is very much looking at this and very much an advocate for the community on this as well, and making sure that the Sewage and Water Board and other entities are thinking about this holistically and equitably. And we really want to get this done, right? Because this is a public health risk for everybody.
Yeah, I will say, Peter, and for everybody, Rebecca, we've had, when she says multiple, both lawyers in the state and outside the state, and their interpretation is the same.
Wonderful. Thanks for the encouragement.
Yeah. And we actually just talked to one of the lawyers yesterday, and we're going to hopefully send we have a lead report coming out. Speaking of, I'm going to plug that. We've been testing lead, and Kennedy is one of our interns across the city. We're really excited to produce those results for you guys and talk more deeply about what we're talking about right now. I believe we have the date set for October. And so more those who have signed up for this will definitely make sure you all get the information on that, so we can do a much deeper dive. But I did have a question, speaking of you, Peter, for you, and then one of the policies on insurance. And I wanted a little bit more clarification because I've heard varying opinions about the protections for consumers, right? That 3-year turnover. And actually, Tim Temple spoke on TV not too long ago, and maybe might have been WDSU about that policy, and he couldn't really elaborate on how that's going to protect consumers, and how that particularly is going to protect their rates. And so I didn't know if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because I understand what you mean about we're the only ones that have this policy, but also Louisiana feels like every natural disaster happens here. So.
Great question. And so when we were talking about Commissioner Temple about this before the session, really, because this was something that he was going to promote, we wanted to ensure that there were protections so that there in law, there's some limitation about what percentage of policies per year can be dropped. It was added into law, some flexibility so that when the commissioner deems fit, even more policies can be dropped. That was of concern. Of course, it is nice that there is a limit on what percentage of policies can be dropped. The fact that more policies than that may be dropped in circumstances that is a little bit concerning. So we have gotten verbal confirmation that from the commissioner that a regulation will be posted that provides, so you can do this by law and then clarify via regulation. So Louisiana Department of Insurance should be publishing a regulation around how that really works, dropping policies. So stay tuned for that. I have not seen it yet, but that regulation should provide more clarity over who can be dropped and when. And what we really want to prevent is we do not want all of those policies to be dropped in one particular region of the state. We would prefer for it to be spread out across the state so that risk is not concentrated in any part of the state. So hopefully that regulation will include geographical protections as well. But great question, Jessica.
Yeah, and I had a follow-up too on that point too, Peter, about, thank you for answering that. It's really helpful, and we'll keep an eye out, I know. The other thing is about the fortified roof program, because I wanted to also get clarity on that. Really excited about that, Peter, and you and I have been talking about that for a really long time. But with that being said, I've read in various articles that they didn't really clarify how much the reductions would be seen, right? And if you put the fortified roof in, I'm hearing conflicting stuff that said I didn't see any reductions in my rate. And so just wanted to know if you knew anything about that was included in the bill, or if that's going to be something that's going to be moving forward.
Great point, Jessica, again. And it's my understanding that a separate duplexes bill is supposed to address this. The Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance worked with Senator Duplessis on this bill, and I think it was it was passed. Ultimately, it was a compromise between Senator Duplessis and the Department of Insurance. But I may be misremembering, but I believe now the Department of Insurance has to publish online on an annual basis those discounts by company. Right now, companies have to file those discounts, but LDI doesn't necessarily have to make them public. I've gotten some averages from LDI, and on average, it's about 18%. But I have not seen the by company breakdown, and we have reiterated to LDI many times, and they're very receptive to this, that before making an upfront investment in improving your roof, policyholders need to know what to expect on the back end. So we agree with that, and I believe Duplessis's bill gets us a little bit closer to transparency on that. But let's stay tuned and follow up and work with Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance to make sure that occurs.
Thank you, Peter. And I know, Caitlin, you were unmuted. I mean, you had your hand up. Sorry.
I just wanted to follow up quickly because Peter mentioned discounts. And I know the legislation you're referring to regarding discounts, that was Rep. Mandy Landry's legislation, I believe. But the protective measures or the enforcing measures that she wanted to implement actually didn't go through on that. So now the discounts are available, but the insurers basically have room to say whether or choose whether they want to do that or not. Like they're not forced or mandated to do it. It's more so, well, you should be able to do this, and if you do it, thank you. But if you don't, now there's no real repercussion if they don't. So it was just a moot point, but I think it was important to mention that as well. But yeah, I think we see some
well, I don't think it's
questions
a
in the
moot point, because what you just said, Caitlin, someone just commented, and Ms. Bailey just said that, right? That she changed homeowners insurance. For those who are not on a computer, she just said, I just changed homeowners insurance this week, and the new company expressly does not offer any reductions for fortified roofs. Please keep pushing. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that your point is very real.
It's not moot. It's real.
Yeah,
it's real.
That's real. But what's especially real is the difference between admitted carriers and not admitted carriers in Louisiana. So you have admitted carriers are charging more and more because of the regulations put on them. So many people are opting for surplus lines or not admitted carriers. And all of these laws that we talk about, while these surplus lines have basically our Department of Insurance regulates them a tiny bit, and all of these laws only apply to admitted carriers, so it won't necessarily apply to every single insurance company that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's good to know.
I just also wanted to offer, if Bailey, if you want to come off mute and talk more to your point, or you're welcome to, no pressure at all.
Oh, no, happy to. I don't have any real specifics, but obviously it's something we've all been following for a long time. When I bought my house in 2020 and my annual premium was $3,000, and then a couple years ago it was $9,700. And with the agent that I had, initially we got down to like, 9,000, and I just switched by, combining with my auto insurance, whatever. And I'm getting to around 7. But I thank you for bringing up, Peter, the admitted, non-admitted. I honestly didn't even think to check that. I just was so interested in getting my annual down a little bit. So, but yeah, that's about it. I'm doing the roof anyway, at some point, or planning on it. Just hope to avoid now having also a $20,000 hurricane deductible. It's just a not great situation all around. If anyone has an insurer that they like, please share.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bailey. Tish.
I agree. Since Hurricane Ida, my insurance company bailed out, and which means they left me with scraping to complete my home. My home is only 900, a little over 900 square feet. It's a little 2-bedroom apartment that I own. And I applied for Citizens, and was $1,800 that I paid up front. And then 3 months later, they sent me a new bill for $1,800. And I was like, wait, that's a bit much, and I ended up not having, I'm uninsured. So I'm like praying and holding my breath through, especially this month, because this is the critical time, August, September of our devastations when it comes to hurricanes. And I'm uninsured, and I'm waiting for things to change, but it just doesn't seem like anything is going to be something that the working poor, if you want to say that, people who work every day but still can't afford to insurance. I don't have any. So I mean, everything that I'm looking at today, y'all didn't give me much hope. I'm telling y'all now, I'm ready to just say, what in the world am I going to do? I can't fortify my roof. As a matter of fact, the people who came and did my roof after Hurricane Ida, my shingles are sliding off of my roof right now. That company is gone, because you're totally exploited. You're desperately trying to get in your home, and these fly-by-night people come in, and they are, they just abuse you. So I don't know what they use that was substandard, but right now I have shingles just like oozing down off of my roof and falling daily. The heat can hitting it. It's unreal. So anyone that is getting a great insurance policy or anything that's reasonable, please share. I'm waiting for it. I need it.
And one thing that I will mention is not this session, but previous sessions and special session in 2023 and regular session in 2023, the Insure Louisiana Incentive Program was stood up. This is a program that replicates what was done after Katrina, that actually gives insurance companies money up front to write policies in Louisiana. And there are about 10 companies that took up the state on this offer. I've put a link in the chat that shows these companies and agents that can get you quotes for these companies. It might be worth checking. These are admitted carriers. These companies may not have been writing policies last time you checked with your insurance agent. So just wanted to bring this up because these are newer companies in the state that just might be worth checking with, just in case.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you for sharing your story, Tish and Bailey. And I see other folks in the chat that we know the stories, but we really appreciate you sharing. And I mean, that's why Peter's here and we're here, and Housing NOLA, and there's so many others trying their best to continue to advocate for consumer protections. And so, yeah, and I do want to spotlight Simone before we end. Is there anything? I know the conversation ended up being about insurance, and we didn't get to coastal. But is there anything you want to add, Simone, before we end the session?
I feel like Caitlin, I would have talked all day on coastal, and not to leave on this note, but it's not much better on the coastal end. you should know that, Louisiana has made really significant investments in their coastal program, and we are concerned about several things that we think are moving in the wrong direction. But don't want to end on that note, so I'll go back to Louisiana has made significant investments, and I do want to recognize that next week is a really important week here in coastal Louisiana, especially historically with the anniversaries coming up of Katrina, Ida, etc. So I know it's not a great time to talk about bad news about and the coastal program either. So, but thank you, Jessica, for the invite to be here.
Thank you. Caitlin, I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure. I know we didn't get to coastal. I had some coastal thoughts too, but
Oh, it's okay. It's
we need to
totally
do a follow-up and one that brings joy. We
yes,
do an
absolutely.
activity to lift the spirits. So.
Yes, and I wanted to first say thank you to all of our participants, especially our lovely guest speakers, Peter Wagner and Simone Malos. Did I say it correctly? Malos. Also, shout out to the policy team, Rebecca Malpass, Director of Policy and Research, Taya Fontanet, our Policy and Research Coordinator, and shout out to me. I also wanted to close out and just summarize once again that we did talk about a wealth of things across state governance, water management, energy, and water and insurance. And we are very excited to extend y'all to sign up for, I think we have a newsletter. So y'all can sign up for our newsletter by going to nolawater.org and stay up to date on all things happening. And if there are no other questions, our contact info is listed here on the slides. Thank you so, so much. And everyone have a good day.
Thank you, guys. Really, really appreciate you coming.
Thank you, guys.